The woman pounding on my newly installed front door wore a name badge labeling her the president of the local homeowners association, and a look that suggested she had single-handedly drawn every property line in existence. I opened the door partway, a screwdriver in one hand and pieces of a half-built bookcase in the other. On my porch stood a woman in a crisp polo shirt, clutching a clipboard and a 3-page document she thrust toward me. Per the community covenants, Section 3.1, she stated sharply, you are in violation and must vacate this home immediately. I was too stunned to speak for a moment. I just moved in yesterday. Yes, she replied, illegally. My gaze drifted past her to the end of my driveway. The newly placed street sign clearly read a name that was not part of her community, identifying it as unincorporated county land. Behind her, the perfectly manicured neighborhood ended at a brick monument with a polite sign thanking visitors. My house sat squarely on the other side of that line. You do realize this property isn't part of your association, correct? I said. That's literally the boundary. Her nostrils flared. When you departed our community, you implicitly agreed not to compete with our aesthetic. This lot is directly adjacent. You are degrading our view. The board has voted. You need to leave. I looked at her for a long second, then I laughed. That isn't how anything in the real world functions. She leaned closer, her expression icy. We'll see what the county authorities think when we report your unsafe, unpermitted construction. I set the screwdriver down, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to a contact, saved simply as the county building inspector, a person I'd come to think of as my link to sanity. Funny you should mention the county, I said. You're about to make a new friend's acquaintance. Before all this, I had been an ideal association resident, a quiet professional in my early 30s with a stable job. I kept my lawn neat, never parked on the street, and generally minded my own business. I'd purchased my first home inside that planned community, which had rules covering everything from mailbox specifications to acceptable patio furniture colors. For 3 years, it was perfectly fine. I worked, I grilled on weekends, and I stayed out of drama. Then I met the HOA president. Our first interaction involved her presenting a printed photo of my driveway. You cannot have a red tool chest visible from the street, she informed me. It looks industrial. I moved it to the garage. Then came a warning about my welcome mat because it had a written message on it. An email followed, criticizing my display of 5 Halloween pumpkins when the maximum was 3. A formal notice arrived because my recycling bin lid hadn't closed fully on a windy trash day. The final straw was a reminder taped directly to my truck's windshield, in the rain because I'd parked too close to my own mailbox. I began digging through my old closing documents. I discovered that the lot my former house sat on wasn't the only available land. Just outside the formal subdivision, on the far side of that brick welcome sign, was a narrow strip that had never been annexed into the association, a legal no man's land. The county plat map showed it clearly, a tiny island of independence. 2 months later, after some determined online searching and work with a realtor, I sold my old house and bought a newly constructed home on that unincorporated strip. Same view, same schools, no homeowners association. When the moving truck passed the neighborhood monument and continued on instead of turning in, the HOA president had been out walking her dog. She watched my furniture go by with the look of a ruler witnessing a subject's defection. She recovered swiftly. By the time I'd assembled my bed, she had apparently decided that if she couldn't keep me inside the association, she would simply extend its reach to cover me. The petty theatrics started immediately. On my second day, I found a welcome packet from the association on my porch, complete with a covenants booklet, a fee schedule, and a handwritten note expecting me to maintain community standards as an adjacent property owner. I recycled it. The next day, a second envelope arrived, a notice of non-compliance. The violation was an unauthorized exterior paint color. I was instructed to submit a color swatch for approval or repaint my front door a specific shade within 2 weeks. My door was a neutral slate gray. I mailed the notice back with a sticky note that read, "Not a member. Please stop littering on my porch." This did not de-escalate the situation. Within a week, the former president began walking her dog exactly along the property line twice daily, pausing to scrutinize my lawn. She was seen photographing my backyard fence from the community walking path. The association's newsletter went out with a paragraph lamenting nearby properties that refuse to uphold community values, accompanied by a zoomed-in photo of my unfinished deck. Then, the orchestrated complaints began. First, an anonymous call to the county reporting unsafe construction at my address. This prompted a visit from a friendly county building inspector in the middle of the afternoon. Got a report about unpermitted structural work, she said, checking a tablet. Mind if I look around? I showed her the permits, neatly displayed in a plastic sleeve in my garage. She reviewed them, snorted, and rolled her eyes. Yeah, she said. Thought so. Some folks think just outside the neighborhood means it's still theirs. We walked the property. Everything was by the book. She signed off and left. 2 days later, animal control showed up. Sir, we received a call about a constantly barking, vicious dog at this address. I gestured to my golden retriever, who was asleep on his back, a chew toy resting on his face like a sleep mask. Really? I said. The officer watched the dog snore. Yeah, he sighed. We're done here. Over the next month, I collected a bingo card of weaponized complaints. A zoning complaint alleged I was storing too many vehicles. I owned 2. A noise complaint cited loud mechanical sounds at night. I'd run my dishwasher at 9 p.m. A junk complaint cited debris in my yard, which was lumber for a permitted shed. Each time, a county or city employee came out, saw the reality, and closed the case. Each time, the former president watched from her side of the line, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. The breaking point came when I installed a perfectly legal 6-foot privacy fence along the back of my yard. I came out one morning to find her standing at the property line, staring at it as if it were a crime scene. That fence is not on our approved materials list, she called out. Good news, I replied. I'm not on your approved residence list either. Her eyes narrowed. You are destroying the uniform character of this neighborhood. I don't live in your neighborhood, I reminded her. We've been over this. She pointed at my house. As far as I'm concerned, you do, and I will not tolerate this loophole residency next to our community. 3 days later, the fake eviction notice appeared on my door, and things stopped being petty. They became potentially illegal. The notice looked official at a glance. It featured large block letters, the association's logo, and plenty of legal-sounding phrasing. You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 72 hours. Unsafe occupancy. Failure to comply may result in law enforcement involvement. At the bottom, she had signed it grandly, adding the words, by order of the board and in cooperation with county code enforcement. I photographed the notice, then took a picture of the street sign that bore no reference to her community. I forwarded both to the building inspector with a message. Hey, did the county start doing handwritten evictions, or is someone pretending to be you? She called me within a minute. Please tell me this is a joke. I wish it were, I replied. There was a pause. Okay, she said, her voice turning serious. First, only a court can issue an eviction notice. Second, she just wrote my department's name on this like we co-signed her power trip. That's a major problem. That's what I figured, I said. So what now? Now, she said. We treat it as impersonation of a public process. I'm looping in my supervisor and the county attorney's office. Don't throw that paper away and don't engage with her if you can avoid it. I hung up, propped the notice on my counter, and went back to assembling shelves. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, a patrol car drove slowly past my driveway, then turned around and pulled in. The officer stepped out. Afternoon, are you the homeowner? I am, I said, noticing the former president watching from the boundary, phone in hand recording. We received a call about an illegal occupancy and a disputed eviction notice, the officer said. Mind if I see the paperwork you were given? I handed over the packet. The officer read the header, and his eyebrows rose. This is on HOA letterhead. He flipped a page. And this part about cooperation with county code enforcement? That's not how any of this works. That's what the county told me too, I said. Behind the patrol car, a white county SUV with code enforcement printed on the side pulled up. The building inspector stepped out, accompanied by a man in a county windbreaker who looked like he'd seen every kind of association nonsense imaginable. "Hey," the inspector said to me, then nodded to the officer. She glanced at the notice in the officer's hand and let out a low whistle. "Oh, wow. She really did it this time." The man in the windbreaker offered his hand. "I'm with the county attorney's office. We'd like to speak with the person who signed this." I nodded toward the property line, where the former president had moved closer. "Ask, and you shall receive." The trio, the officer, the inspector, and the county attorney, walked over to the invisible boundary. The former president stepped forward as if greeting dignitaries. "Officers, I'm so glad you're here. We have a serious issue with a non-compliant resident endangering our community." The county attorney held up the papers. "You wrote and delivered this?" "Of course," she said. "As the president, I'm obligated to enforce occupancy standards in and around the community. His house affects our property values." "In and around," the building inspector repeated quietly. The attorney's tone remained polite, but his eyes cooled. "To be clear, you understand this property is not part of your association. It's unincorporated county land." She waved a dismissive hand. "Adjacent lots are de facto part of the neighborhood. The sign is merely ceremonial." The building inspector nearly coughed. The attorney continued, "And you understand that only a court can issue an eviction, and only a sworn officer or authorized agent can serve one." Her smile tightened. "We have broad enforcement powers. It's in our covenants." "No," the attorney said. "You have powers over your members on land subject to your covenants. That does not include this homeowner or his property." She crossed her arms. "Well, we'll see what the association's attorney says." The attorney's expression didn't change. "Interestingly, I am the county's attorney, and what I see is a document on your letterhead that falsely claims county cooperation, orders someone to vacate their home, and implies law enforcement backing where none exists." The officer stepped in. "That's a serious issue, ma'am. Misrepresenting governmental authority and calling emergency services to report a fabricated eviction is a misuse of the system." Her composure began to crack. "I was simply doing my duty. That house is an eyesore. Look at that fence. It doesn't match." The building inspector, who had been quietly simmering, finally spoke. "Your duty doesn't include putting my department's name on your personal grievance. We handle actual safety hazards, not aesthetic disagreements." The attorney flipped a page on his clipboard. "We've also reviewed the complaint logs from the last few weeks. 9 calls or anonymous reports about this address alone. All were unfounded." "They were not unfounded," she snapped. "That dog barked at me once." "From my porch," I added, "when you stepped onto my flower bed to photograph my deck." The officer turned. "She trespassed onto your property?" "Twice," I said. "It's on my security cameras." The officer looked back at her. "So now we're adding trespassing to the list." Her voice rose. "This is harassment. You're all ganging up on a volunteer. I give my time to keep this community beautiful." The attorney's tone stayed flat. "You used your volunteer position to impersonate county authority and attempt to force someone from their legal home. That isn't community service. It's an abuse of authority." He closed his folder with an air of finality. "Here's what will happen. You will cease all contact with this homeowner. No notices, no letters, no claims of adjacent authority. You will immediately stop using county or law enforcement language on association documents. You will receive a formal letter from my office regarding your creative interpretation of your powers." The officer added, "And if we get one more bogus emergency call about this address, I will personally pursue charges for false reporting. Are we clear?" For the first time, she had no retort. She just stood there, mouth slightly open. Behind her, 2 residents who had wandered over to watch suddenly became fascinated by the sky. One was already texting rapidly. I watched the balance of power shift definitively. like a seesaw finally tilting the other way. The queen of the cul-de-sac had just discovered the exact limits of her kingdom, right at that brick monument. The real fallout occurred at the next association meeting. I didn't attend, but neighbors sent videos. The meeting opened with the former president trying to explain. "There's been a misunderstanding with the county," she said tightly. "They overreacted to a routine compliance notice for the adjacent property." The county attorney had apparently seen the agenda. Midway through her speech, he walked into the clubhouse, a county badge on his belt, and sat in the front row. The room fell silent. Her smile froze. "Since my office is listed under your legal update," he said, standing, "I'll save time." He laid out the facts simply: the fake eviction notice, the misrepresentation of county involvement, the multiple unfounded complaints and emergency calls, the trespassing. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. "We are not pressing criminal charges at this time," he stated, "but a formal warning has been issued. Any further impersonation of county authority or harassment of adjacent property owners will be treated as intentional misconduct." A murmur spread through the room. A man raised his hand. "Are you saying our president could have gotten the association sued?" The attorney nodded. "Yes. If the homeowner had pursued civil action, both the association and individual board members could have been named. The county will not protect you from consequences you were warned about." Someone in the back exclaimed, loud enough to hear, "She did what?" Another hand shot up. "Did the board actually vote on this eviction notice?" Silence. All eyes turned to the former president. She swallowed. "The board empowered me to act on their behalf." A board member cleared his throat, his sense of self-preservation kicking in. "We empowered you to send a letter, not whatever that was." The attorney raised an eyebrow. "So the board did not formally vote to evict a non-member from a house you don't govern?" The board member shook his head emphatically. "Absolutely not." Phones were now openly recording. A woman near the front stood. "My spouse is on that board. Why are we just hearing about this? Have you been using our fees to wage a personal war?" The former president snapped. "It's not personal. He's undermining our property values. That fence of his is nicer than half of ours here," someone shouted from the audience. Another voice added, "He moved because you harassed him over pumpkins." It snowballed. Within minutes, the meeting became a public reckoning. Someone demanded to see her emails regarding me. Another asked how much association money had been spent on legal consultations that never involved an actual attorney. A third pointed out that the bogus complaints had put the entire community under unwanted county scrutiny. Finally, a homeowner who looked thoroughly exasperated stepped to the microphone. "I move that we remove the current president from her position, effective immediately for abuse of authority, endangering the association financially, and making us all look foolish." Seconds came from multiple directions. They took a vote. It wasn't close. On the video, you could see the moment she realized she was losing her position, not metaphorically, but in actual fact. The engraved gavel she'd used for years was taken and handed to another board member, who looked stunned by the sudden change. The county attorney slid a document across the table to the shocked board. "This is a recommended policy. It clarifies that your association has no authority over adjacent properties, requires board approval before any contact with non-members, and prohibits the use of county language or implications on your documents. Sign it, and we can consider this matter contained." They signed. She did not. She just stood there, eyes blazing, as the small, controlled universe she'd commanded shrunk back to its actual legal dimensions. Afterward, as people left, the same exasperated homeowner was heard saying, "All this because she couldn't stand that someone lives one house outside the gate." Unreal. The video ended with someone muttering, "I'm calling a realtor. I want to live on that Freedom Street." Following her removal, the new board voted to bar her from holding any board position for a decade and required all officers to complete a course on fiduciary duty and preventing authority abuse. The county's formal warning was placed in her file, noting that any future incident involving fake government paperwork would bypass the warning stage entirely. She stood frozen at the podium, her face flushed as the reality settled in. 10 years, she whispered, staring at the board members who had just voted against her. But it was already done. The gavel was in another's hands. Her reign was over, ended not by political maneuvering, but by her own overreach and her desperate need to control something that was never hers to begin with.